Hi, folks. This is Lee W. Mowen, the host of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. I've been hosting my podcast on Anchor for some time now, and let me tell you why it's the easiest way to make a podcast. When you host with Anchor, you have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or phone. Anchor then distributes your podcast for you so others can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can even make some money with your podcast with no minimum listenership required. And best of all, it's 100% free. It truly is the one-stop shop for those looking to start a podcast. To start, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor. It's time for episode 152 of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, where our special guest is Shelby Dermer, a high school sports writer for the Cincinnati Enquirer. We're talking Cincinnati high school sports in this edition of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. Welcome to the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. This is a weekly podcast covering all sports in Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio. From Lima to the Ohio River and northern Kentucky, from eastern Indiana to Madison County and all points in between, this is your source of local Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio sports. Visit the leewmowen.com/podcasts to find your favorite podcasting platform. Music created with the Splash app. Time for another episode with your host, Lee W. Mowen. Please welcome to episode 152, Shelby Dermer of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Shelby, nice to have you aboard, and how are you?
Absolutely, Lee. Pleasure to talk to you today, and doing all right, hanging in there.
Shelby is a high school sports writer for the Enquirer, and today we're going to be talking a lot of sports. But first off, where are you from?
I'm from Waynesville, Ohio, so about 20 miles south of Dayton. Graduated from Waynesville in 2013 and went to Ohio University in Athens.
Okay, Waynesville, small village, but good football team, the Spartans.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Southwestern Buckeye League. How did you get the job at the Enquirer? How did you find yourself in Cincinnati?
Yeah, so I always expected to pursue play-by-play broadcasting, and I still have a passion for it, and I love doing it. So in college, I did play-by-play broadcasting internships with the Purcellville Cannons. So it was a collegiate summer league team in Purcellville, Virginia, about an hour away from D.C., and that was before my senior year of college. And then after my senior year of college, I took the same position with the Cincinnati Steam of the Great Lakes Summer Collegiate League, and after that it was all about trying to find. I kind of felt like with the Steam it was a kind of a buffer 3-month period where I can add another internship to my resume, and at the same time kind of pursue what my first paid job would be in the career. And basically, when that Steam season came to an end, it was trying to find a job, and it came down between two. It was I had an interview with the Journal Leader in Caldwell, Ohio, and the only reason I knew that Caldwell even existed was that I had a girl that I was friends with at college that lived in my dorm that went to Caldwell, and it's even smaller than Waynesville. So, and then the next one was with the Enquirer, and the Journal Leader kind of came first, so I was kind of all in on them. And actually, I missed a phone call from Melanie, who's my editor now, and I still have the voicemail on my phone, just saying it's just crazy now to think back on it. But in the end, I'd be stupid not to take an interview whenever I could get them, and interview came with the Enquirer, and you go up to the 19th floor on Elm Street, and I saw my first. I'd been in newsrooms at college, and it was nothing compared to what I saw at the Enquirer, and I just kind of fell in love with it. A tall building downtown, and all the schools that we'd be covering, over almost 150 between Northern Kentucky and Greater Cincinnati, and decided to roll with them and move to Cincinnati.
That's kind of a neat story, just because you have one small town's paper and then you have Cincinnati, Ohio, and the Enquirer. So that's pretty cool. Can you name some of these schools that you get to cover? 150, that is a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of, I would say, a pitfall of my job is that you can't help but leave some schools out, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, for some of the schools, we don't have a particular assigned section, whether it's East and West. James Weber does most of the Northern Kentucky stuff. So we focus, me and Scott Springer and Alex Harrison, Sierra Newton, the rest of the preps crew kind of focus more on the Ohio side. Mm-hmm. And everywhere from Elder, the bigger names when it comes to football, with Elder and St. X, Coleraine, Moeller, and obviously LaSalle's had a dynasty lately. And then over on the east side, Marymount, Milford, Loveland, Madeira, just some of the schools, and even downtown. I love CMAC basketball, is one of my favorite things to cover, and Hughes, Taft, Woodward, Aiken, some of those schools. And it's quite a hefty load of schools, but you get your money's worth. A lot to do there. You're never hurting for stories.
How far north do you go in terms of school coverage?
Yeah, it's a pretty hot debate, because sometimes we just don't know. And for instance, in girls tennis, it comes down to, I think, we wouldn't cover some of these teams in the regular season, but if they were to advance in the playoffs, we shift our coverage towards that. Schools like in tennis, girls tennis, I think her name was Abby Nugent from Springboro, won a Division I singles title. So we cover that. And then obviously Springboro had some talented swimmers too. Hannah Hill won a couple of state titles earlier this year in February up in Canton. So Springboro, I think, is the absolute most northern school we cover. And it's unfortunate to me because you have Springboro and Lebanon in there as two of the most northern schools we cover, and left right on the outside looking in is Waynesville. So it's just a little quick nugget there that my alma mater gets a little left out, but I understand that it's pretty far north, and Lebanon, Springboro, especially two big schools like that, that's about as far north as we go.
That's got to be tough too, just because you have the Miami Valley claiming Butler, Warren, and Clinton counties, but then so is the tri-state area too. So it's like kind of like an overlap of media. I don't know if that's a big problem or not, but
yeah, no, not really. We've seen there's a lot of coverage for actually like Butler County, and they do great work. I mean, Chatterbox Sports just came on the scene. Rick Casano started his own thing that actually includes Waynesville, which, if I get on my soapbox here about Waynesville for a second, is they get left on the outside looking in far too often, not from just the Enquirer. But yeah, Butler County, a lot of coverage. The Butler County High School Sports Report, Chris Vogt does a fantastic job. Then I said Chatterbox, and Rick Casano started Southwest Ohio Sports Daily. So Butler County, a lot of that coverage shifts to the I guess, would you consider that West Side, Butler County? I'm still kind of getting used to it, the area, but yeah, it doesn't really. We don't get a lot of overlapping. In some cases, when we do branch out and cover Lebanon and Springboro, that's the only coverage they get, and that was one of the biggest things, Lee. I'll say, when I got the job at the Enquirer, was I had no idea that people took high school sports this seriously. I mean, my senior year at Waynesville, we were the number one team in the state for baseball. No credit to me. But there was never a reporter at our games or anything like that. No feature stories on our coach, Tommy Bagley, who's now at Fairfield, got a Division I job there. So, I mean, in terms of coverage, I had no idea that people took high school sports this seriously. But I remember my first day, I signed my paperwork, got my badge, and was on my way. And I sat in on Adam Baum, who's now the Xavier reporter, and Scott Springer, who's on the high school beat and does a fantastic job. I mean, he runs around like nobody's business. But I sat in on a video they were doing about football, and talking about the offensive line changes at this school and, the receiving unit that lost 2 stud seniors the year before and who the star quarterback was going to throw to. The names are blanking on me, but just them going into detail about high school sports was completely foreign to me. But it was something that just attracted me too. It was like, wow, they treat this like college almost. Not almost, they do. And it's more than just, covering one team. It's a whole barrage of talented squads in Cincinnati. And that was one of the biggest positives I saw, and one of the biggest eye openers too. Once I got down to Hamilton County, was that they really take it seriously here.
And like you mentioned, passionate fan bases for all the schools. It's amazing, in Ohio how you can go to a sporting event. It's always packed with the fans and everything. It's really something that I feel, especially up here in Dayton, that doesn't get mentioned a lot, I guess, is what I'm saying. But let me ask you real quick. It's not on the list of questions, but with the SWBL losing a couple teams and Waynesville, the eastmost team, how would you feel if they added Clinton, Massey, and Wilmington
to the SWBL?
Yep.
Yeah. I would say it would make the competition a lot stronger. I'm pretty sure Massey, it wouldn't help our football schedule anymore for Waynesville at least, because I was on the sidelines for some of those games and it wasn't pretty, Lee. But Wilmington, obviously, usually a pretty good basketball school too, as is Waynesville. I'm not real sure who are I know like Preble Shawnee, I think, is leading the SWBL, and is East Clinton too? Is that?
No, East Clinton's in, what is that? It's the Sovereign, is it the SBAAC, something like that?
East Clinton, yeah, you're right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was talking like back in my day, old man yells at cloud that East Clinton was in the SWBL. So that was my bad. I forgot that they had left already.
You're younger than me. Don't give me the old man yells at cloud stage. The other school moving out is Dixie, and they're going to help most of the cross-county conference schools form the Western Ohio Athletic Conference. I know that because Preble County is my hometown. Well, home county, but that's why. And also, it's been a very popular topic on Yappy as well. So I
bet.
I figured, former Waynesville Spartan, the only thing I could see is Eaton. Man, that'd be a heck of a drive from central Preble County to Clinton County. Whew.
Yeah, absolutely. Eaton was one of those. I mean, they're in the Southwestern now, but we only played them, in a handful of sports on a handful of occasions, really. So we avoided that trip, and I'm glad.
Yeah, that's a pretty long trip. I mean, it's kind of a straight shot to Eaton, but it's still, you see a lot on 73 and 122. But
right.
You mentioned the schools, but what about the sports you cover? Yeah,
so and I mean, this kind of ties back to what you talked about with some of the Dayton teams being overlooked is my favorite thing to cover. I hope if it's okay to get into what my favorites are.
Go for it.
But state swimming's my absolute favorite thing in the world to go cover. Tony Tribble, who does photography for the Enquirer, it's kind of been our yearly tradition now to go up to Canton. And, it's sad to say, Lee, but we're the only Cincinnati outlet that goes to cover it. And Cincinnati has some outstanding swimmers. St. X has a dynasty. They've won, I think, 12 straight Division I team titles, 41 overall.
That's crazy to think how successful that program is.
Exactly. And Indian Hill won a title this year on the boys team side. And then, of course, like from Sycamore, Carson Foster, we're probably going to see him in the Olympics. The first day I was up there 2 years ago, I saw him set a national record. And I see teams from, I keep coming back to Waynesville, but they had a kid, now the name's blanking me. I think his name's Owen. But he's won state titles the last couple of years, and Oakwood's always had a great team and never really got the coverage the Dayton area did. That's why we were kind of able to expand to Springboro. But and then as far as outside of swimming, like I said, which is my favorite, nothing really. I mean, it's so cliche, and these high school football states like the Texas and I know Florida has some amazing teams, and Ohio is up there as well. That you can't beat Friday nights, and you really can't. You go to the Pit for an Elder game, and it's an experience. It's one of my money, probably the best stadium in Ohio, in Southwest Ohio. But yeah, football, and then especially when you get into playoff time, Elder and St. X played an absolute thriller in Mason last fall that I got to cover. And that's just electric, where you don't see anybody in the fourth quarter. No one's walking around. No one's in line at the concession stand. It's just they're all on pins and needles because there's so much tradition with those two teams and a bunch of teams in Cincinnati, and they're hanging on every single play, and it's really incredible to watch.
That's one thing I miss announcing is collegiate swimming and diving at Wright State. I mean, that was a lot of fun. It's a great sport. It's a great it's very athletic to be a part of. And
absolutely.
When you cover swimming and diving, where are some of the facilities you go to?
Well, I've only been to Canton. So it's only the state swimming and diving that I've been to. We send photographers to all the districts and the regionals. When we go to state, they announced it before the national anthem. They said this is at the CT Brandon Natatorium in Canton. This is considered the best high school swim meet in the country. And it's kind of biased, but then you look around the atmosphere, it's so enclosed there. The fans are absolutely insane, and they all come from all over the state, and they're there for the top 8 swimmers, and they're loud for the consolation race where they go whoever finishes 9th through 16th. So, it's just the atmosphere itself. It's for a minute when you first go there the first time, your ears need to get used to it. But after that, you really appreciate just how loyal these fans are, how passionate they are for swimming, which unfortunately might get overlooked in the winter, in the November, December, January area, while everyone's kind of focusing on basketball races.
Now, swimming and diving is pretty unique because I think most schools don't have their own venue, right? Like, it's not at their own school. Do you know some of the places where they go around Cincinnati? Because it's something I don't know about, actually. Yeah,
it's mostly like, for instance, a story that comes to mind. I wrote about a pair of the McQueary twins from Bethel Tate, and they had to. It's a local YMCA wherever they go, and even back at Waynesville, I didn't swim, but they had to go to the Lebanon YMCA for their practices each day. But yeah, it's the Bethel Tate kids. I know one of them's name was Ian. I'm blanking on the other one. Yeah, they had to leave their house incredibly at before 5 a.m. to get to the YMCA when it opened and get their practice in before school starts, and then go there again after school. So it's like swimming. A lot of people don't know that, this swimming to these kids is sometimes like a full-time job.
And that's tough to balance too. You got actual schoolwork and lives, and then it's swimming time. So
exactly. They're trying to be kids at the same time. They want to go hang out with their friends and have homework, obviously prepare for college and other extracurricular activities. So, the dedication these swimmers have sometimes is just second to none.
I will mention, me being a Valley View alum, I think our swimming and diving team went to the YMCA in Springboro, which, if you know where Valley View is, that's a hike.
Germantown, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You have to go through Miamisburg to get to Springboro, or if you're going south, Carlisle and Franklin to get there.
Right.
But yeah, it's always amazing to hear about sports that, maybe this is going to sound weird, but maybe don't follow as much, but I like learning about this type of thing. Now, we mentioned some of the sports that you get to cover, but what are some sports that are available to you that you'd like to cover one day?
I think, and it comes back to some of these sports that we don't really cover until it gets to the state mark or deep in the postseason. Mm-hmm. So, this past weekend should have been a wild one where we have state softball, which we cover all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have state softball, we have state track and field, which we cover all the time. And but the other two states up there in Columbus, state tournaments, are boys volleyball. Moeller has a dynasty, it seems like, and boys and girls lacrosse. Those are both in Columbus. Not maybe Columbus, but a little bit outside of Columbus. I know boys volleyball is at Capital University. I don't think that's considered Columbus, but yeah, those two sports. I haven't been to lacrosse yet, just because the schedules didn't line up for me to go. But lacrosse I would love to see, and then kind of in the winter, what was robbed of me, but I don't want to sound selfish, because a lot of kids worked hard to get to their state tournaments and their senior years and stuff, so mine is not that big of a deal. But I was planning on going to state wrestling in Columbus the same weekend as state girls basketball, so cover Mount Notre Dame for state basketball. They probably would have won it all, and then swing over to, I believe it was St. John's for state wrestling, which everyone that you ever talk to that goes brags about how great of a production it is, with the fire entrances and the ring of winners, or whatever. I don't know what exactly it's called, because I haven't been, but yeah, state wrestling is definitely on my list.
I love high school wrestling. I only get to announce one holiday tournament per year, but I love it. We have 50 schools come in, a lot of Cincinnati schools, a lot of Dayton area schools, and it's a lot of fun. Just how many people pack that gym, it's really nice. So, yeah, we would have had nice weather too for softball finals. Although I remember a tweet you sent, what was it, last year, 2 years ago, that Greater Cincinnati and state title games for softball all time is 0-8, something like that.
Oh, it's unreal. It's their. I know they haven't won a Division I softball state championship ever, because they switched to the divisional format. But yeah, I think Division I teams from Cincinnati are, I would say they've sent at least one team to Akron or wherever the state tournament is in 23 of the last 24 years, and eight of them have won the Final Four game to make it to the state championship, and they've lost all 8. And so it's a bit of a curse. Lebanon was up there with some close calls. I remember they had a controversial ending. There was an interference call that lost them the state title a couple of years ago. And then last year, Lakota East played easily the most entertaining, and I wrote about this, probably the best game I've ever covered in any sport. They lost to Louisville, which I found out is a city in Ohio.
Yeah.
But
isn't that nice?
Yeah. They lost to Louisville in extra innings. Louisville came back and won 14-10, and it was, and I mentioned this, that, this is the best game I've covered. Sometimes it doesn't come out on the side of the Cincinnati team winning, but it was this girl named Justina Soroman had a bases clearing double with her team down 3 in the bottom of the, or top of the 9th, top of the 7th, last inning. 3-2 count, bases loaded, 2 outs, down 3, and she smacks it to the wall for a game-tying double, and they go on to win. But that game just seesawed in extra innings. That was easily the most entertaining game I've ever seen.
Was that also the game where they had to resume it like the next day or something like that?
Oh, you mean when I had to book a Red Roof Inn in 10 minutes? Yeah, that happened. They called it in the bottom of before the bottom of the 6th. So Lakota East was up. Lakota East was up, I think 6-4, 7-4, something like that. And it was in the bottom of the 6th before their at bat. So they knew they had 3 outs to go. Or they were up 8-6, sorry. And they hit a home run on the first batter of the new day on Sunday, hit a home run to take them 9-6. And you kind of thought that was going to be enough. And then obviously that young lady ripped that bases clearing double in the top of the inning to tie the game. But yeah, it was resumed the next day, and Lakota East immediately hit a home run, and you thought the streak was over, and unfortunately not.
Yeah, I remember that. I'm just like, wow, that's got to be tough. And mentioned it's in Akron. That's where the Racers play. That's professional softball. You think, they have lights so you can play it, but it might be like a time thing for high school sports. I don't know.
Yeah, there was all kinds of stuff going on. It was bad lightning in the area, and there was no sign of it leaving at any time. They had two separate delays, each of them lasting like an hour or so, and then the second one, it was about an hour and a half, and they kept playing the Electric Slide and YMCA and Sweet Caroline on the loop. And after 90 minutes, people got tired of that. They were about ready to play, and more lightning came into the area, and it was just bad. And there was no way to resume it. But then, they had to reschedule. At first, it was rescheduled for one time. They pushed it back because another team had to play before that because they had graduation that weekend. So it was a whole, it was a whole production. I'm glad I didn't have to make those decisions, but yeah, it was a wild 2-day frame to say the least.
So we talked about schools and we talked about sports. Now, Shelby, what are some of the favorite games that you covered while with the Enquirer?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned state swimming's my favorite, that Akron game with Lakota East, and then I mentioned St. X and Elder in the playoffs last year. A couple other ones I'd mention was CMAC basketball, and nothing's better than a game that comes down to the wire. And Hughes and Taft played an absolute thriller last year. This year in January, Hughes had no business winning that game, and I think it was a mixture of coaching by Brian Wyatt and a mixture of clutch performances by Hughes guards. I think Cameron McKenzie had 35 points in that game. He had a 3-pointer to tie the game to send it into a second overtime, and then had an and one with like 4 seconds left to push Hughes to an 85-82 win. But that game is an electric atmosphere, and it's actually the first time I've been to a Taft game where they've lost. Interesting enough, they're pretty dominant. But yeah, that was one of probably the best basketball game I've seen. And then obviously in softball, I mentioned Lakota East. Lakota West had a great state semifinal the year before in Akron. It was Allie Cummings hit a go-ahead home run in extra innings, and they held on to win. Unfortunately, they lost in the state title game the next day. But that was a great game, and kind of trying to wrap my brain around it. Girls basketball had some other good ones. Excuse me. Football wise, Summit Country Day and Purcell Marion, out of all the schools, they're rivals now with Purcell joining the Miami Valley Conference. They played an absolute electric game. It was the opener of the 2018 season, very first game of the high school sports season, on a Thursday night at Walnut Hills, and it came down to the very last second. I remember a young kid named Zach Hoover, sophomore quarterback. He's going to be a senior this year, was just electric down the stretch. I mean, completing like 2 or 3 third downs, or their fourth downs, excuse me. But he had a great game that day. So those are the ones that kind of come to mind. And then also I wrote about Anderson boys soccer in 2018. They beat defending state champion Beaver Creek in a district championship game at Lakota West. And I remember the winning goal was scored in overtime, and from my seat in the press box, all you saw was a kick rise, towards the goal, and then a scrum of bodies. And the next thing you know, a soccer ball emerges from that scrum and into the back of the net past a diving goalkeeper. And I think it was Jeff Blankenship was the Enquirer's photographer for that game. He had a beautiful shot of it, and I remember that just because it was a stunning upset, and you have smaller stories in these games. I'll remember Anderson's goalie in that game was a freshman, Ryan Sullivan, and he was just relentless because Beaver Creek was stacked. They were the defending champions, and they were a great team, and they outshot Anderson the entire game. And Ryan Sullivan was a freshman. He just never backed down, and he got steamrolled near the goal and got hurt, came right back in, and immediately had to make a couple saves. I think he made a penalty kick save to force overtime. So that was certainly an impressive effort.
Yeah, Beaver Creek's really good soccer, both
Absolutely.
Boys and girls up here.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I remember that upset, and that was a really good win. But Summit Country Day, they're really good in boys and girls soccer too, because I always see the tweets where they're on the bus heading out for state.
Yeah, Scott Severing has done a great job over at Summit Country Day, and they definitely have their own dynasty going on.
Going back to CMAC basketball and all sports, what's your take on Withrow returning to the Metro?
Yeah, I think it'll be great, and by all accounts that people I've talked to, they're excited, and especially from a basketball standpoint. I know they had a few good years in the ECC, but it's been down recently. Excuse me, but Berto Allen is the new head coach there, and I talked to him, and he's extremely excited. He did great things with Gamble Montessori over the last couple of years. I mean, they kind of dominated that CMAC Blue division, and they were Division 4 for a little bit. So he definitely is a guy that it was due for a promotion, and I'm happy he got it. And hopefully he brings good things to Withrow. From what I've heard, all the way back to the years of Yancey Gates playing there, that it can only help basketball, is what I'm really trying to say.
Absolutely. Although one thing I'll miss, that was my first football game with ESP Media. We were at Withrow with the Loveland Tigers, and I remember that game. I remember that venue, Angus King Stadium. Man, that's historic. It's beautiful there.
What year was that?
Just this past football season. It was
Withrow won that game like 39-0.
39-0, and I remember you tweeted that was their first ECC win since 2016 or something like that.
Yeah, sounds like something I'd tweet.
I looked at it, it's like, of course, now you tweet me this after I sign off. But hey, no,
sorry,
I'm kidding.
Sorry about that, Lee.
No, I'm kidding, but no, I like Withrow going back in the Metro, but I also, I'll miss Angus King Stadium because Loveland doesn't play them anymore.
Right, and I think Daniel Ingram, Withrow, that game, had a great game, as he did pretty much all season, going to UC. A good story for him too, and he's deserving. I'm excited to follow him. I'm
excited too. I mean, you have a Cincinnatian staying with UC, and if I remember right, he was the quarterback, running back, and man, he just great legs. Just he could just run for days, and yeah, he had a heck of a game against Loveland. Absolutely. What are some of your favorite venues that you've got to see over the years? Well, I would say the Pit in Elder. CT Brandon Natatorium in Canton. Favorite swimming and diving, so go back to that. Then state softball in Akron, Firestone Stadium, and I'm sorry I keep talking about the same kind of sports and same teams and venues, but I mean in Akron they put on such a great. They have a softball Hall of Fame there that dates back into the 30s. Wow. A Hall of Fame that from the Great Depression era of just newspaper clippings, and Babe Ruth is going to be here, and it's cool to go around and read. I'm a history buff, so I love going there and just kind of reminiscing about the past that I wasn't around for. But elsewhere. Shocking or maybe underrated stadium is Marymount. And that's only because there's so many trees around it that it never feels like it's hot. It always cools down fast there. And it's I couldn't work a camera to save my life, but apparently that works well with photographers too. But yeah, Marymount, sneaky good stadium, right there, on Route 50, I think. So it's always cool there. It always feels like it's a Friday night in October when it's 60 degrees there. Other stadiums, St. X has a beautiful stadium. Princeton has a great football stadium. Basketball, Moeller has a great basketball stadium. LaSalle's is kind of old-fashioned basketball stadium, so I kind of like that too. But yeah, you get to some of these places that host in the tournament, you kind of see why. Like Mason hosts football Atrium Stadium, beautiful. Their basketball stadium's beautiful too. And then the new in Middletown, is it the Jerry Lucas Stadium that just opened up in Middletown? Yeah, I think it's Jerry Lucas. They tore the old one down closer to downtown Middletown, but yeah, that's a beautiful venue, and that's a great place for the Midwest King Classic?
Yeah, yep, and I remember covering that when I think it was Purcell Marion and Deer Park played a pretty good game there. It would have been January of 2019. I was sick, and there was a big ice storm that came in, but I remember getting there safely, and I remember being in all of the stadium, and it was very nice, and I wrote my article and then sat there and watched Lakota East almost beat Moeller. So it's a fun classic that they do there.
Yeah, it is, and it's just as good as Flying to the Hoop, except Flying to the Hoop's been around for
Flying to the Hoop is Flying to the Hoop.
Exactly, yeah. But at the same time, it's still a great tournament. It's also nice too that you have some teams that will have a game at Flying to the Hoop and then come down to Middletown and play in that classic, or vice versa. But it's still nice how you can get a little tour de Southwest Ohio on that.
Absolutely, yeah. They do a great job of providing the best of the best, and even Princeton does a great job. They have the one that just happened, and now I'm blanking on the name, but I think Ozzie Davis helped organize that. I remember seeing Hughes and Moeller play there. It's usually like the very first weekend of the season, but yeah, I'm blanking on the name, but it's a very good one too, and it's relatively new. They've only had it 2 years.
Yeah, now I'm blanking on that name too. I know what you're talking about, but I hope Princeton's football stadium, staying with Princeton, I hope that's all right, because there was a couple weeks ago on Twitter, there was that video about the football field being completely underwater, and
yeah, well, let's hope. And now it's the Queen City Play-by-Play Classic is what it was.
Okay. Yeah. I like that name, but definitely it's, Princeton's field was great, especially when I was in school. My senior year, we had a playoff game against Monroe, and yeah, it's a beautiful field there.
Yeah, and I just covered Valley View's playoff game against Wyoming at Princeton too. And yeah, great field, and unfortunately your Spartans
yeah, but
found out who Evan Prater is.
Yeah.
But so did a lot of teams.
I'm really happy to see him go to UC as well. I was a little shocked about the loss to Clyde, but they won the state title, so. Yeah,
that game was just weird, man. It was, Clyde had a bulldozing fullback, and their offense was straight out of 1991. But yeah, it was fullback dive, fake a fullback dive, option outside, and that kid was just dominant. And whenever Wyoming needed a stop, 3rd and 10, and Clyde would run for 11, and 3rd and 9, Clyde would run for 10, 3rd and 1, and Wyoming would jump off sides. Wyoming just couldn't catch a break. Evan Prater had a highlight reel run in that game, but outside of that, Clyde's defense, you got to tip your cap to them, because I think they had a pretty good game plan and kind of kept Evan contained, which, as we've seen, no one's really been able to do.
I'll be honest, I had to look up where Clyde was. I knew they played a couple Dayton City League teams before the playoffs began. It's like, where is Clyde? And they're
still don't know.
Yeah, they're in Northwest Ohio.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's just weird, because they're in the same bracket as 416. Where
coldest
Wyoming...
I've ever been at a game, Clyde, Wyoming, because I don't know. They might. Marysville, first off, is a hall. So I'm not sure how far away it is from Cincinnati. I think I'd say about 2 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, they must not like newspaper guys there, because we did not get a spot in the press box, and I did not dress for attending a game on the sidelines, and I had to. And I was shaking in my boots and had to tweet on my phone, and I sound really spoiled right now, and I'm realizing that, so I'm going to stop.
Hey, it's an experience. So, actually, if you want to be really cold, if we have ice hockey next year, come to a game at Northland.
Okay.
bundle up. Elder and Muller play there. St. X used to play there, but they moved up to Sports Plus. But yeah, definitely, if you want to be cold, Northland is where it's at.
I'll either go to Northland or I'll go back to Monroe because I've never been to Monroe when it's warm out. It's up too high. There's always wind, and Waynesville always played them week 9 of the football season, so it was late November and always cold. Even we played Monroe in baseball, and we'd play them in March, and it was like basically snow. And we won the game again. No credit to me.
I was going to say, when I was on high school track, we always had meets, like big meets at Northmont, and it was always windy and cold. I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why is it always windy when we're at Northmont? I don't get it.
Yeah, so Marymount, it's always beautiful. It's always a fall day, 60 degrees. You need a light jacket. Monroe, you always need to dress like you're ice fishing. It's just that's how it goes.
I will say, sticking with venues, I love broadcasting Loveland Tigers football, and at Loveland, when you're on top of the press box, but it feels like you're on top of the world, and it's, you don't even see all the stuff on Mason Montgomery. You just feel like you're in the middle of a forest watching a football game.
Right. Yeah, those are always the best, and it's like the same with, Clint Massey when Waynesville used to go there and get shellacked every year. Theirs is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and same with Marysville Stadium is unreal. Mm-hmm. But same with them, kind of you're just driving on a 2-lane road, and you're like, well, I hope I'm in the vicinity of a football game soon, and then lights hit you. It's like driving into downtown Pittsburgh if you ever do that. You come out of the mountains in a tunnel, and PNC Park just slaps you right in the face. So it's kind of like that.
Isn't it also where you go through a tunnel and then there's like 4 exits right in front of you, and you're in the wrong lane, like always, and you just switch?
Yep. I am 0 for 1. Yeah, so I am 0 for 1. Looking forward to returning and trying my hand again.
Never been to Pittsburgh, but I just know the memes on that. Also, Kings Stadium, the castle.
Fantastic.
Oh, it's great. It's beautiful. And you forget how close you are to Kings Island. That's something I always like about that. Turpin in the middle again.
I was just about to say Turpin.
Turpin's beautiful. Didn't get to go to Anderson. I had a prior commitment last year, but I've heard that's beautiful.
I've yet to go there either. Just hasn't lined up.
Where else have I been? Let's try to pinpoint this. But no, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I am excited, though, if we have football this year, because Loveland is scheduled to be at Winton Woods, and I know where that is. But I can't wait to see their stadium, just because they're a really good program, too.
That's a good stadium, too, Winton Woods.
Now, let's head back to you, Shelby. When did you know you wanted to be a play-by-play broadcaster and then a journalist?
Yeah, so it goes back to it was Brad Johansson who used to do the Bengals games. Mm-hmm. And it was my full-time job as a third grader at Waynesville Elementary to mimic Brad Johansson every Monday morning, whether the Bengals lost or won the day before. I think I remember the first Bengals game I attended was in 2003. They beat the undefeated Chiefs. Ooh. And so that game was everywhere the next day, and there were radio calls to it. And I remember mimicking Brad Johansson, Rudy Johnson running like a human bowling ball, and that was the line of Peter Warwick's punt return and then ensuing touchdown catch to kind of win that game. So that's when I fell in love with play-by-play. And then for football, I played basically my whole life as a receiver. And then after 2 years at high school, I was never really passionate about it, but I knew I was passionate about the game and covering the game and being a play-by-play announcer for the game. So after 2 years, I quit football to broadcast it while still playing basketball and baseball. So luckily, my good friend, his name's Grant Dopel, one of the best people I've ever met. He started SpartansLive.com, or it kind of was already started, but he was a good he kind of introduced me to it, and we would travel and do Waynesville's games my junior and senior year. So that's kind of how I knew I was passionate, and with such a small, tight-knit community like Waynesville, everyone listened to it. So it was a lot of, I was just new to Twitter, and I'd get tweets saying like, "We love your energy on the mic, and we love listening to it." And my parents were listening to it on the back porch because they couldn't make it to Middletown Madison for the game, and it was fun. And that was always my dream, and I was naive to think I'll just go to OU, stay there for 4 years, broadcast some sports, and then I'll land a big play-by-play job out of college. So that obviously didn't happen, but when I got to OU, I found out the play-by-play positions were very limited unless you were doing some of the minor sports, which I didn't have a good understanding of at the time. So, but the writing opportunities were, plentiful. There were tons. So, and I don't know why, but I started and stayed 4 years at a little magazine called Speakeasy Magazine. Mm-hmm. That was not centered around sports at all. Very tiny sports staff. But that kind of really gave me the freedom to cover and do whatever I wanted. So I'd cover, OU volleyball was really good. I covered them a lot. They made it to the state tournament. Listen to me, NCAA tournament. And I remember my first game there, they had a doubleheader. They played UC in the opener, and then later that night they played North Carolina. And North Carolina was ranked number 8 in the nation. And I remember I didn't know about press conferences in college yet. And I ran out on the court to interview the coach after the game. And they was like, "Yo, we'll get you settled up in the locker room later." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know." I was so naive about it. But over those 4 years, after 2 years, I was named editor there and just had the freedom to do anything I could cover. Because unfortunately, like I said, it wasn't really sports centered. They did a lot of how to roll your own cigarette articles and stuff like that. And they were cool. They were cool. They were fun reads. But for sports, it was basically me and a few other people. So I got to cover. I did a weekly NFL predictions article that I loved writing, and covered like the local club team. OU's paintball team was like national champions my senior year, and got to play paintball and cover them. OU hockey. The first time I ever even paid any attention to hockey, besides going to Dayton Bombers games when I was a kid, was at OU, where they had a fantastic team that was not an NCAA sanctioned team. So it was a club team, but they were very good. And their coach was my philosophy teacher. And I never went to philosophy class, so I didn't even know that until I interviewed. So, it was they played at this place called Bird Arena right on campus, right in the nucleus of campus. And the atmosphere for those games, even though you had to pay $5 to get in, they were electric, and they had a very good team. They'd win like 30 games each year. So that was cool. I kind of had the freedom to really do whatever I want. And then at the same time, I could pay attention to maybe some prep schools around the Athens area. And that's the first time I ever interviewed Joe Burrow. I was late to a game. I was late to a game because I had stopped somewhere else, and I'm blanking on where I stopped. But I went to the Plains and went to Athens High School, and in the first quarter it was already 21-0 because Joe had 3 touchdowns. And I remember backing my car up and knocking out my driver's side mirror because I backed right into a tree. So that was fun to hide from my parents for a little bit. And then interviewing Joe Burrow, who it's insane to see now, where he was a blonde-haired curly kid who talked like a professional then with media after games, and now he's the number 1 pick and Heisman winner, national champion, everything, and he's gonna be the savior in Cincinnati. At least that's the plan. So it's cool to see that kind of go full circle. And during college, that same guy Grant Dopel, who helped me with Spartans Live, got me on there. He started this little website called Riverfront City Sports, where I got to write about the Bengals and write about the Reds whenever I really wanted to. And I was I was 18, 19, 20 years old and had all this energy and time on my hands. And I was like, I'd love to write about the Bengals and Reds and whoever. And that was a great opportunity. And I thank Grant for that. And then like I said earlier, after that, I kind of looked for internships in college where I could do the play-by-play thing and write at the same time, and somehow landed in Northern Virginia in Loudoun County with the Purcellville Cannons. With some of the best people I ever met. I stayed with the host family. I would broadcast games with Jeremy Huber. He worked at Sirius XM. That's what it was in DC, and he was a professional and still does Georgetown games. And then Brett Fuller and Ridge Fuller were the team's owners, and one was the manager, and they were so nice to me, and I hooked me up with the host family, and I spent a summer in beautiful wine country in Virginia, just broadcasting games, traveling with the team, and serving as the beat writer too. And that was the best experience I could have ever got.
Now, with you covering high school sports with the Enquirer, if there was ever an opportunity to do play-by-play, would you do that and the writing?
If I could do both, where writing was still my primary position, I definitely would, just to kind of dip my toes back into play-by-play. But I just really fell in love with writing, covering games, and there's pros and cons of both being a broadcaster, as you know, and being a writer who has to go to the Tim Hortons in Springfield at 11 p.m. and beg them not to close so you can finish your story. But I fell in love with writing and the feature story process, and I have no TV experience because I never really got into wanting to lug a camera around to games, and I wanted to stay at one the whole night and kind of break down that instead of going to 3 or 4 a night. And I applaud the guys that can do it. I couldn't. I'm also not tech savvy like a normal 25-year-old would be. So that's I fell in love with writing right in college, and if play-by-play came up in my future, it would be enticing, and if I could still do writing, I would venture into it.
You mentioned Brad Johansson earlier on one of the questions. Where did he go to? I feel like he went to New York for
North Carolina.
Okay.
But I think he got fired from that job shortly after.
Really?
Yeah, now he's in Columbus.
Okay.
He went in 2018, he went to Raleigh, North Carolina, and he left after a year. And I think the quote was that there was a personal matter, and it was handled differently, and Johansson bolted, and then now he's in Columbus at WCMH. But he was definitely my idol growing up, and I remember vividly listening to him.
It's kind of cool how our stories are fairly similar. I'd say the person that encouraged me to get into broadcasting be Jim Baldridge of WHIO up here in Dayton. He was a news anchor, but at the same time, I was a kid that wasn't into sports. I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to broadcast. So
right.
I just like how similar those stories are. So
yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, while I was listening to Brad Johansson do the Bengals games, I also in Waynesville, Mike Hartsock was an alum and was basically the mayor of Waynesville whenever he visited. So he was like a celebrity whenever he'd come to cover our games. The brief years that we were good, I think 2007 and 2008 we made the playoffs, but remember him vividly being a big presence media wise that routinely gave some love to Waynesville when they earned it.
Man, he's been at HIO since the very late 70s, I'd say.
Yeah.
Amount of sports he covered, and
preps to pros.
Absolutely. Now, did you at Waynesville, did you ever get the News Channel 7 chopper flying on the field?
Yeah, that was what that's what Hartsock would come in on, and right behind the grandstands, there's an empty park, so it's an ideal place to land a chopper. So it was like, oh, Mike's here, like
How can you tell? He's flying in.
Just flying in. Always humble. Coming in on the helicopter at halftime. But yeah, I remember that vividly as well.
I miss those days. I don't know how true the story is, but I've heard the last time he did it was in Greenville, and the chopper got stuck on some power lines. So I think I don't know how true that is, but that's what I heard. But yeah, those were the days. We had we had that at Valley View, and our field is was at the middle school. Now it's an elementary school, but it's right behind that building, and there's a lot of woods, there's a lot of houses, so really there's not a lot of places to land outside, that grass field. Now it's turf. But I remember those days quite well. And
I actually played AAU basketball with probably Valley View's biggest athlete in the last decade, or Zach Denny.
Yeah, Bowling Green.
Yeah, so then he'd come up to, I played AAU with him maybe in 4th or 5th grade, and then he was too good. But and then it was weird that, like I mentioned, Joe Burrow coming full circle now with the Bengals. It was weird seeing, Zach Denny when Bowling Green would come to the Convo and play against OU.
I actually got to broadcast the game. He broke the all-time school scoring record, and it was against my old school, Twin Valley South at Valley View. It was kind of cool. It was right next to the student section, just hearing everyone chant in that old gym. That was a great game. Now I need to go back and listen to that game.
Yeah, I think our senior year, now I'm looking at it, they beat us 94-76. I think he had 39.
Yeah, so that kid could hoop.
Yeah, so me and him combined for 42 points that night.
Not bad.
So, big deal.
Hey, you helped. You've done more in sports than I ever will, so, there's that. Now, let me ask, the coronavirus, we're still going under the quarantine. How has that affected your job?
Well, there's nothing to go cover. As simple as that. Like I mentioned, this weekend is usually my travel weekend that I'm excited for, and then I'm cussing in the car in the middle of it and saying never again. But yeah, it's usually I'm in Akron for softball, then I go to Columbus for track, and then I go back to Akron for a state championship, and then I go back to Columbus for boys volleyball. So that was obviously axed as well as our entire spring season and winter basketball tournaments. The Jerome Schottenstein Center, great venue for a state basketball tournament. We didn't get that this year, and I think, to no surprise, I think Mount Notre Dame and Moeller probably win again as they did last year. And I missed at Cintas. Moeller was set to play Lakota East for regional championship, and you never know if the underdog might come through in that scenario. And Lakota East is a great coach with Clint Atkins and some great players with Nate Johnson and Caden Furman and guys like that. So missed that, and then obviously when that weather heats up in April and your first game out at a baseball game is just something you take a deep breath in, and it's something to cherish and look forward to all spring. And unfortunately that just didn't happen. But as far as work goes, with nothing to cover, we've all kind of chipped in. We ran this, we are still running. It's called the Heartland series on Cincinnati.com, where we kind of found some levity and some positive news and kind of compiled that weekly into a file. And I think readers appreciated that because, unfortunately, for a couple months, it was all gloom and doom. So when readers would see articles about a local prayer group going to a hospital and, this company and that company donating masks and donating food and senior graduations and Zoom ceremonies with Marty Brenneman doing the Pledge of Allegiance, stuff like that. Just a little positive in a world that we were adjusting to at the time. But now that I think we've seen positive news on the OHSAA side, and it seems like it's clearing up or moving towards the positive, I should say. We're hoping to get back on track, and I know Scott Springer's been out at LaSalle and in Moeller and Elder this week, and they're kind of returning to normal. Not really, but compared to where we were in March, it's a giant step.
It's getting there. But when things get back to normal, as close to normal as they possibly can, are there any upcoming sporting events that you are looking forward to?
I mean, you kind of look for your first Friday night football. It's exciting just because I'm such an NFL guy. That first Saturday night before the first Sunday NFL is my Christmas every year. So, and then from the preps level, that first week you get a tease because Northern Kentucky has week 0, and you don't have Ohio games. But then that first week 1, where you have Ohio and Northern Kentucky, that week leading up to that is just constant, analysis and predictions and video shows and articles, and it's really exciting to break down the matchups. Who's going to do well? Who's a comeback team? Who's going to take a step back? So I'm really looking forward to that first, not just the first Friday night, because that's fun in its own right, but that first week where both Ohio and Northern Kentucky are in the regular season, and the content that comes out of it. I would say that. And then the first Friday night, a couple times last year, I didn't go to a game on Friday nights, but we would stay in the Enquirer office downtown, and we compile live scores, and that's fun. Just going, scouring Twitter for scores, and then filming a video show right thereafter, talking about your team of the night and your top matchups and stuff and results and players of the week, and then immediately that night, about 2 or 3 a.m., I write takeaways from week 1, and it's all hectic, but you never feel like you're working, and that's what high school football does for me.
It's really cool that you don't necessarily have to be at a game to be part of Football Friday. I mean, you're absorbing the scores and everything, and you're rolling it into final scores of the night and what just happened that week. So definitely enjoy that. Real quick, what's your take on playoffs moving up from 8 teams per region to 12?
Yeah, I think, my gut reaction was, good for the top 4 teams getting a bye week, because you don't get one in high school football. And when you have kids playing 2 ways, that their bodies get beat up throughout the season, as you would expect. And then my other reaction was, there's some teams in Cincinnati. I think the day that the news broke, I reached out to Jeremy Fishback at Claremont Northeastern and Coach Chris Mobley at Hughes, and said, you guys, what would it mean to you? Because last year you guys both finished 10th in your respective region, and now this year, if you turn that in, or whenever this is enforced, when it's officially expanded, you'd make the playoffs for the first time in program history. And they said they were both along the line saying, I get goosebumps thinking about if my program could just go to one playoff game. It's Claremont Northeastern is annually they're 6-4, 7-3, but they just don't have the percentage points. Whether it's a tough schedule, there's 3 games each year they might lose, and if they get over the hump in one of those games, they make the playoffs. But those 3 teams, they get blown out, or they lose by a field goal or a touchdown or a play or 2 there that doesn't go their way, that keeps them out of the playoffs. And just hearing those coaches talk about how special it would be if their program could reach these heights of just getting to one playoff game, it's fantastic to hear. And I don't necessarily buy into the speculation that would water down the playoffs. I think there'd be more upsets. And I really wanted to, if I had the time, I was going to go back to last year and enforce this rule and see how many teams were, borderline, they shouldn't be a playoff team that would have made it. Mm-hmm. And I only did it for the Cincinnati regions. I wanted to do it for the whole state. and there were only a few that were like, 3-7 teams make the playoffs. And so I think, in those rare scenarios, you might have a team that is fortunate to get into the playoffs, but as a whole, I don't think it waters down the product too much.
I think you mentioned Walnut Hills was one of those schools.
Yes.
I think they go 5-5.
That sounds about right. In Region 4.
Yeah, that's a pretty tough region to play in.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that Week 1 loss to Miamisburg, if they turn that around and win that, I mean, that's more points right there. But
right.
I agree too. I don't think it waters it down. And besides, you're talking about once upon a time, you had 12 teams make the playoffs. 12.
Right.
And that's for the whole state. And it's like, yeah, so it's more football too, because
right.
More teams get in and they get that experience of playoff football. There's some schools that don't have that. And the only thing is, with the byes, that's going to be a little different having, a week off. What will that do to the top 4 seeds? Will they be more vulnerable to an upset, or is it just what they need?
The old rest versus rust debate. It's those teams like Walnut Hills last year. They were the 12th seed at 5-5. But if you look closer at that region, Lakota East would play Hamilton in the playoffs. And it's like the DMC has 7 or 8 teams in it each year that could probably be a playoff team. Lakota East beat Hamilton in a very close game to end the year, 21-14, and still finished, 3 spots back and out of the picture. So, I mean, if you don't think a rematch would be highly contested too, it's not watered down at all. I mean, Lakota East started 3-1 last year, and they were 4-2 at one point. So I think, especially with those GMC schools, those are a coin flip sometimes when the game doesn't include Colerain.
Yeah, I was going to say, the big problem for the schools not named Colerain and Fairborn is the Cardinals and Indians exist.
Right.
Was that a Week 10 battle, Colerain Fairfield, and that went to OT? That was a lot of fun to read about too.
That was one where you're at another game that isn't as good and you're following it along. So I was following Scott Springer's report on that, and Colerain won in overtime 16-10, but that was such a good game where it was like, oh, Colerain's winning it now, or Fairfield has this one wrapped up, and then it's like, oh, but they miss an extra point or something like that, or Colerain scored a touchdown to make it 16-10, but missed the extra point in overtime, and then Fairfield had it 1st and goal at the 5, and you're like, well, Fairfield's going to win. They have Utah McLean, and next thing you know, it's 4th and goal at the 12, and their pass is incomplete, and Colerain's absurd streak continues.
It's crazy how strong that Cardinals football team is, but it's also nice to see. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, is like I really, if we're talking about the playoff expansion, there's no reason, I would be remiss to not mention Winton Woods.
Yeah,
beating LaSalle, the D2 state champion, and not getting in the playoffs because they couldn't find an opponent. They would never have to worry about that again. So, they had maybe the best running back in the state going to Ohio State, Mayan Williams, and they're not going to play in the playoffs because they're independent and not in a conference, and their strength of schedule is too high, and they dropped some games, and it kept them out. So, check that box off, because the expansion will cover that, because there's no reason that should happen again. And I know a couple of years ago, I think it was 2017. It was in Region 4. There was a big uproar because Elder finished 6-4 and didn't make the playoffs. Like, I guess they're called percentage points. They missed by maybe like a half of a percentage point to Fairfield, who finished 6-5, and Elder finished 6-4. Well, Fairfield, they both finished 6-4, but a 4-6 Moeller team made the playoffs, and Elder didn't. And Elder beat them 42-14, and Moeller went to the playoffs. Elder didn't. And so I think the expansion covers the there won't be as many bubble teams that get left out, because I think if you're down in 13th and you miss, I think there's not much debate as to whether you should have made the playoffs or not. And good luck to Joe Itel this year.
Yeah, I mean, the work that he does for, computer points in Ohio high school football, it's amazing what he does.
That's my plan this year. Is I tried last year, didn't get a response back, but I was gonna go up to Columbus, wherever he lives, and just spend the evening following him, around and what goes into, getting scores from Twitter and from coaches calling him and everything for a feature story. I'm excited for that if it ever comes to fruition.
I mean, I need to ask him again to be on my podcast, because I feel like that'd be a really cool interview, just because all the work he does for Ohio high school football.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. He's I don't know what his day job is, but it can't be as exciting as week 9 or week 10 of the regular season.
Oh, I hope it's not.
Right.
That's the best time for high school football.
Right.
Now, with Whitten Woods going in the Eastern Cincinnati Conference, do you think that it helps the Warriors because they're in a conference, or maybe they don't have as many non-conference slots? What's your take?
I think, if they continue to bring back, obviously Mayan Williams is gone, but I mean, if Coach Parker, he's one of the best in the city, I think you pencil in Whitten Woods for at least 8 wins a year. I mean, in the ECC, it's tough. I mean, Kings has had great years. They've fallen off a little bit last year. Turpin's been great. West Claremont comes up. Loveland hasn't been as good since they won that state title in 2013. So I think you pencil in a team like Whitten Woods now that they're guaranteed 10 games and they don't have to scatter for opponents who might be scared to play them. I think it's a blessing for them to be guaranteed those 10 games and a chance at a conference championship.
I also like Little Miami joining the ECC, because it's almost like a Fort Ancient Valley Conference regrouping with their Kings rivalry. So I'm definitely looking forward to what this high school football season brings. Hopefully we have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Little Miami's kind of their little 2-year renaissance they've had with Nate Mahan, and now I'm blanking on who their coach was last year. I think his last name was Jones, but I can't be positive.
I thought he took another job. Or am I thinking of New Miami's coach?
Nate Mahan?
Yeah, I feel like
he went to Hamilton.
Okay, I thought someone went to Middletown Madison from one of those two.
I'm not sure, but Mahan led him to the playoffs in 18 and then took the job at Hamilton in 19. But Little Miami still made the playoffs last year after Mahan left.
And that's a pretty nice story, too, just because before that, Little Miami made one playoff trip, and it was back in 92. So,
right.
Definitely
right.
nice.
Yeah, they squeaked in. Well, that's kind of the controversy, is that Little Miami snuck in the playoffs over a Whitten Woods and then had to meet state champion LaSalle in the first round 42-0. But, I mean, still making the playoffs quite the accomplishment.
And since I mentioned them, I'm going to go ahead and say that round 1 loss that New Miami suffered in the playoffs, that surprised me. I mean, New Bremen's, they're in the Midwest Athletic Conference up north, and that's football up there. But
yeah,
at the same time, I didn't expect that lopsided affair.
Yeah, I guess it's just, maybe it's the competition in Cincinnati. I know New Miami, I don't think they had a game decided by one possession all year. I think their closest game was against St. Bernard. I remember it being somewhat close against St. Bernard, but it wasn't like down to the wire. But they had a lot of 40-0 blowouts. So maybe it's just the competition as far as Division 7 goes in Cincinnati that wasn't up to par is what it is up there in New Bremen and in that area.
Shelby, for those interested in either broadcasting or journalism, what advice can you give?
Get your name out there as much as possible. That's probably cliche, and a bunch of other journalists will tell you the same thing, but it's, I worked for free for 7 years. So, I mean, as much as you can add to your resume, add it. Try to find something you like, cover it. If it's, I wrote about sports betting, which I'm big into, and fantasy football, and just the NFL predict, anything you can get your name out on, get a byline out there, and keep adding it to your resume. And if you grind hard enough, the cream rises to the top. You better your craft with multiple publications or sticking with one and just churning out that content. It'll pay dividends for you down the road.
Now, for those that are interested in following your work and you on social media, where do they go?
You can follow me on Twitter at Enquirer Shelby. At Enquirer Shelby. You can also see my work on Cincinnati.com. And then we also have videos, we have articles on there. On Facebook, you can join the group Enquirer Preps Plus, where essentially all of our articles go that are involved with preps in any way. That group has been booming on Facebook. So join there for all of our content. If you're a parent, we have our Greater Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky Parents Group, where we have content all the time. So it's really easy to get a hold of me. And if you ever have a story idea, sdermer at enquirer.com. I'm happy to write it and look forward to hearing from you.
And to wrap up episode 152, what would you like to see in the future for Cincinnati sports or Cincinnati media?
Yeah, I think we do a pretty good job of it now. And when I saw this question, I didn't know how to answer it because I have no big complaints. I know that we can't cover 145 schools every week, and it's impossible to do that. But it's something that I would love to include the smaller guys sometimes with stories, and that's part us going to those games and going to those practices and finding stories. But it's a lot to do where we can't travel to all these schools all the time. So communication from coaches, parents about notable players, notable stories, notable journeys, comeback coaches, historic seasons, records, stuff like that to be mentioned to us. And we'll try our best to do that. But I know there's some schools that slip through the cracks because we have so many, and hopefully that changes in the future and we can give them their due.
But again, 150 schools and,
right.
3 areas, 3 states. It's a lot. So
it is.
I mainly wrote that question just because I'm always interested to see what people want to see in the future in terms of, I want to see more radio stations covering sports, or, I don't know. It's just something that, what do you want to see further ahead? Like, what would you like to see added?
I get it. I think TV stations in Cincinnati, we have 4 of them, and Fox 19 is our media partner, and I think all of them do a great job of covering the bigger sports, and they're always at the top basketball and football games. So I think they do a great job. As far as radio crews, I'm not real sure because I don't. Besides Chatterbox joining the fold last year, I don't see a lot of radio on the east side of Cincinnati. I'll say that because I think Chatterbox focuses more on Butler County / west side. So maybe an east side radio station pops up, or it's probably already out there and I'm just not aware of it because I just don't know. But as far as that goes, I think Cincinnati does a pretty good job covering most sports. And I don't want to encourage them to do something like state swimming because the Enquirer has been pretty exclusive on that for the last 3 or 4 years. So I think we like to keep it that way because a lot of people turn to our coverage for that.
What's state swimming? There is no state swimming. Get out.
Exactly. Yeah, that didn't happen.
I will also say I do like Tri-State Football's post-game show. They cover the Bombers on radio on 1360 and I think 1530. And I like the work they do because they do cover, all 3 states. And that's not easy to do. So definitely hats off to them.
Right. And that's one of those ones where, they have one sport to focus on and they do a great job of making sure they, dot the I's, cross the T's when it comes to that sport.
I think one thing I like to see is Cyclones on radio.
Yeah, well, they have a play-by-play broadcast. It's just TV because Everett Fitzhugh does their games. He's right behind the media table, and that's another thing I got to miss out on because the last 2 years I've covered the Cyclones playoff run because they've had such great success under Matt Thomas, ECHL Coach of the Year last year, I believe it was, and the Cyclones won the Brabham Cup. So those games are electric to cover too. The great atmosphere, if you want to talk about that.
Oh,
great atmosphere at, well, not U.S. Bank, Heritage Bank Center, whatever it's called now.
It's still weird to not see it as U.S. Bank, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, I like the stuff he does. I mean, the work he does. It's just, it'd be nice if it was, localized and not just on internet, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like you said, I think Cincinnati media does a great job covering sports in Southwest Ohio, and it's always my favorite listen when I'm in the car, especially when I can pick it up.
Yeah, well, like I said, when I came from Dayton, where we got virtually no coverage, and I didn't see much besides Friday night wrap-up videos, it's head and shoulders above what I was used to. So, I mean, to have complaints about it or visions of the future, I'm thinking, Cincinnati's pretty on top of it for the most part.
Absolutely. I agree with you on that. Any last words before 152 wraps up?
Support local journalism.
Support local journalism. How can people do that if they want the Enquirer?
Yeah, you can Cincinnati.com/subscribe. I think we run specials. I feel like it's every week, and I know we have one now. We just had one for Memorial Day, and there's one in the summer too. And just about the price of a cup of coffee gets you a subscription to all of our premium content for a whole month, and so on for a whole year.
Shelby, thanks for coming on board, and always appreciate your work, and hopefully see you in Cincinnati sometime.
Absolutely, Lee. Thank you for having me.
This has been episode 152 of the Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast, and we'll talk to you again for episode 153.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. To subscribe to the podcast, please visit theleewmowen.com/podcast. From there, you can choose your favorite platform, such as Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, TuneIn, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, and many more. Interact with the podcast and host on Twitter at the Lee W. Mowen and at CinDayPod. Like the Facebook page, the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and download the free Flick Chat app, then search for the local Sunday Sports Group to submit your future Mowen's Mailbag questions. The closing theme is Lights Go Down by Dan Hennig, provided by the YouTube Music Library Collection. This is Lee W. Mowen, and I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please join me again next week on the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast.